Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack one of the most intense, explosive, and frankly, psychologically complex confrontations of the entire post-World War II occupation. So, set the scene in your mind for a second. It's May 9th, 1945. The war in Europe is officially over. Adolf Hitler is dead, and the Third Reich is literally in ruins. We're at a requisitioned German military barracks just outside of Munich, and a routine, highly formal surrender ceremony is about to kick off. You've got 53 high-ranking Wehrmacht officers lined up in pristine uniforms, totally ready to formally surrender their command to the American forces. Now, this was supposed to be a civilized, symbolic transfer of power, the exact kind of thing they'd photograph for the newspapers back home, but instead, it is about to explode into a massive psychological showdown. Okay, let's dive right into this. Out of the 53 German officers standing there, the whole dynamic split drastically the very second the American national anthem began to play. Protocol dictated they render a traditional military salute to the flag of the occupying power. Standard stuff, right? But instead, 41 of those 53 officers completely shocked everyone in that courtyard. They snapped their arms out into a stiff-armed Nazi salute, clicked their heels, and shouted Sieg Heil in unison. I mean, think about that. The American anthem is playing, the flag is rising, and these 41 defeated men are saluting a dead dictator instead of acknowledging their conquerors. Only 12 of the officers actually rendered the proper, compliant salute to the American flag. And that brings us to our first major turning point, Part 1, a defiant surrender and the 3-second shock. For 3 incredibly long seconds, nobody in that courtyard moved. The American soldiers literally couldn't believe what they were seeing. Up on the reviewing platform, General George S. Patton watched with absolute murderous control. One of his aides actually noted later that Patton's jaw was clenched so tightly, his neck muscles looked like steel cables. But he didn't shout, he didn't flinch, he just waited for the anthem to finish. And as the music ended, the defiant officers just lowered their arms, acting like nothing had even happened. The senior German officer, a 58-year-old career military man named General Klaus von Rothenburg, steps forward to sign the surrender documents. But right as he reaches for the pen, Patton finally moves. He says just one word: stop. He steps down from the platform, his boots striking the pavement with these really deliberate, measured steps, and he walks right up to von Rothenburg, completely freezing the German general in his tracks. So Patton directly demands to know if he had just witnessed 41 officers render a Nazi salute. Von Rothenburg, who was this very aristocratic guy from an old Prussian family, actually attempts to justify their defiance. He leans hard on the traditional view of the old guard, basically arguing, look, we're professional soldiers. Sure, we've surrendered our weapons and our territory, but we haven't surrendered our honor. They genuinely viewed themselves as military men just doing their duty to Germany, insisting they were completely separate from the actual ideology of the Nazis. Well, Patton's response was like a whip crack. He completely dismantled von Rothenburg's defense on the spot, firing back with the brutal reality of their actions. He says, "You stand there and talk to me about honor, you who served a regime that murdered 6 million Jews?" It was intense. He brutally reminded these German officers that every single one of them had sworn a personal oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler, not to the nation of Germany, but to a dictator. Patton was entirely exposing the cowardice of clinging to a dead madman rather than just facing the reality of their defeat. Which leads us directly into Part 2, stripping the uniform and dismantling identity. Patton quickly recognized that standard military discipline just wasn't going to break this level of fanaticism. So he gives a shockingly brutal order to his MPs. He deploys this deliberate, 3-step psychological tactic right then and there in the cold courtyard. Step 1, remove the uniform. You see, to a Wehrmacht officer, that elaborate uniform with all its medals and perfect tailoring, that was their entire identity. It's what allowed them to feel like elite, honorable warriors. By literally stripping it away, Patton was shattering that identity. Step 2 would be to shatter their deniability, and Step 3, to force true accountability. And when a young American captain actually tried to bring up the Geneva Convention, Patton shot him down immediately, basically saying that fanatics throwing Nazi salutes don't get to hide behind the shield of military courtesy. So, given exactly 30 seconds to strip or be stripped by force, the officers reluctantly complied. I want you to picture the visceral reality of this scene for a moment. You have 41 once proud officers suddenly reduced to shivering men in their undershirts, standing entirely barefoot on the freezing Munich pavement. Some of them were quietly crying, others were just burning with absolute shame. Patton let them stand there like that for a full minute. He was intentionally creating a massive contrast between their sudden, extreme vulnerability and those 12 compliant officers who were still standing right nearby, fully dressed in their pristine uniforms. And that brings us to the next phase of this crucible, Part 3, confronting the atrocities and the end of deniability. Because Patton didn't just strip them physically, right? He stripped them morally. He had his aides bring out these horrific, newly circulated photographs that were taken during the liberation of concentration camps, places like Dachau, Buchenwald, and Bergen-Belsen. Patton forced these half-naked men to stare at images of skeletal corpses in crematoriums. It brilliantly illustrates the core clash of realities happening in that courtyard. Von Rottenberg was desperately trying to argue for what historians call the clean Wehrmacht myth. This idea that the regular army somehow fought a pure, professional military war, totally separate from the SS who ran the death camps. But Patton ruthlessly hammered home reality. He pointed out that it was Wehrmacht logistics networks that transported those prisoners, and that their officers cooperated directly with the killing squads. He forced them to confront the fact that they were really just arguing over degrees of complicity in a genocide. Moving on to Part 4, the final choice and renouncing the oath. Having completely dismantled their psychological defenses, Patton laid out his ultimatum. They could either cling to their oath to Hitler, keep saluting a dead dictator, and face maximum security detention and war crimes investigations as unrepentant Nazis, or they could acknowledge reality, admit they were wrong, and formally salute the American flag. But right before they had to make that monumental choice, Patton does something totally unpredictable. He orders his MPs to hand out 41 American military blankets to the shivering men. He told them, look, I'm not going to let you freeze to death while you make your decision. He deliberately wanted to show them that Americans weren't barbarians, and more importantly, that even men who had made terrible, horrific choices deserved a genuine chance to make a better one. Now, General von Rothenberg, who is deeply shaken at this point, looks at the photos of the atrocities, looks at Patton, and asks a really vital question. He says that if they are going to actually renounce their oath, it can't just be some meaningless gesture to save their own skin. It has to actually mean something. And Patton surprisingly agreed. But he demanded their pledge be based on specific principles. Not a pledge to America, not a pledge to a new political system, but a solemn responsibility to the truth, a commitment to face exactly what was done and to ensure it never, ever happens again in Germany. And here is the stunning climax of this entire standoff. 38. Out of the 41 defiant officers, 38 made the choice to change course. It all started with General von Rothenberg. He lets his American military blanket fall to the ground, stands barefoot in his undershirt, comes to attention, and renders a proper traditional military salute to the American flag. He audibly renounces his oath to Adolf Hitler right there. And within 5 minutes, 37 other officers followed his lead. However, exactly 3 officers outright refused. 2 of them were young fanatics who had essentially grown up knowing absolutely nothing but Nazi rule, and the third was a silent, elderly general. They stood their ground and refused to yield. Patton didn't hesitate. He immediately had his MPs drag them off to maximum security detention. They made their choice, and they were going to face the full consequences of their fanaticism. Let's wrap this up with our final section, Part 5, Winning the Peace and a Complex Legacy. So after all this, Patton actually allowed the 38 men to put their uniforms back on, but he warned them that their identity as an elite military class was permanently dissolved. They were no longer this special caste. They were simply German men who now had a choice about what kind of men they wanted to be moving forward. And you know, this specific moment really helped kickstart a much broader historical process, denazification. Patton basically asked these men to go out into the world and actively counter the comfortable lie that the Wehrmacht was clean. And amazingly, some of them actually did. General von Rothenberg and several others became the very first to publicly testify, write accounts, and work with Allied authorities to uncover hidden networks. It proves that this brutal psychological dismantling had a real, tangible historical impact. Also, it's really vital to look at what happened to those 12 officers who saluted properly right from the very start. They were quietly commended and quickly released. Remarkably, several of them actually went on to serve in the Bundeswehr, which was West Germany's new military when it was formed later in 1955. They proved that separating professional, honorable service from ideological fanaticism wasn't just possible, it was literally the only viable path forward for a rebuilt Germany. We've seen how what was supposed to be a totally routine surrender turned into a masterclass in psychological warfare, forcing defeated men to face the agonizing truth of their own complicity. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Did Patton go too far by stripping these men of their dignity, or was this brutal psychological dismantling exactly what deeply ingrained Nazi defiance deserved? Put yourself right there in that courtyard. Would you have made the same choice in Patton's position? It's a messy, incredibly uncomfortable piece of history. But understanding moments like this is absolutely essential to understanding how peace is actually won. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the history you think you know.